So we're in Unit 18, and we're talking about the indirect interrogative and also indefinite relative word hostis. If you look at the nominative singular form there, hostis, you can see it's composed of two things, namely, namely hos and tis. Hos is the relative pronoun, hos that you all know, and tis is the indirect, not indirect, but the
just the direct interrogative?
No, it's the direct
indefinite.
interrogative when it has an indefinite. That's it. The indefinite adjective tis. That's it. Which means some or any, right? So the combination means whoever, or whichever, or whatever, in English. And if you look at the forms, they're interesting. It's the enclitic form of tis, the indefinite tis. Sorry, I forgot it. Plus added on to the forms of the relative pronouns. So hos, hu, ho, and han. Accent kind of moved off to the left there for the accusative, Belisi. But anyhow, you just add the enclitic to them, and the accents just remain unchanged because the enclitic at the end doesn't change the meaning. It's one word, hostis, hut, and hos, and so forth. Notice that in the genitive and the dative, for both singular and plural, you tend to have a collapsed form. That is, what's left of the hu is just ha. So hatu, and then you inflect it as though as a second declension noun. Hatu and hato, these are newer forms, and in fact much more common than hut and hos and hotini, but you do see them. Haton and hatois in the plural are rarer, but hatu and hato are pretty common in Greek. So, and then the feminine forms and the neuter forms, I think you can determine. You can see it's hetis, hastinos. You inflect both the relative and the indefinite adjective. That's the tricky part. Okay. So these are indefinite relative and indirect interrogative. The idea there is that whoever, you can say, you can use whoever in sentences that are like conditional sentences. Whoever doesn't like cold water won't swim in the Northeast. Okay, so that's like a conditional sentence. If anyone doesn't like cold water, they don't swim in the Northeast. And so you can have regular conditional sentences, and that's a relative clause, whoever doesn't like cold water. But you can also use them as an indirect interrogative. In other words, when you are quoting a question. He asked me, whoever doesn't like cold water. Okay, that's an indirect interrogative. A direct interrogative is, who doesn't like cold water? Question mark. Not embedded in another sentence, right? So use indirect interrogatives for embedded questions, but in Greek, guess what? You don't have to. Most of the time they don't, okay? So you're going to see hostis much more commonly as a relative, an indefinite relative, whoever, than as an indirect interrogative. So there up on the Belisi's blackboard is the direct interrogative, tis, te, who or what, and then whoever or whatever is what hostis mostly means. Hostis hates hate, but as an indirect interrogative, it means who in the world with a question mark after it. What in the world? Okay. So, and then the next thing the book shows you is a sequence of words of interrogatives and the indirect forms that you have of them in Greek. Greek doesn't always use them, but they're there. There's a chart on page 26. We missed the chart on 525. There's a chart on 525 of direct and indirect interrogatives like tis, te versus hostis, hatis, hate. So you also have poios, that means of what kind, and pausos, about how much or how many. We had them in the previous lesson. But if you add ha in front of them, they become indirect interrogatives. So there's a chart on page 525 of the indirect interrogatives and their direct forms. On page 526, there's another continuing chart of direct interrogatives and indirect interrogatives, which can also be relatives, but also the indefinite adverbs or particles that are results of them. So if we look at poo, okay, when it has an accent, it's a question word. It asks where. When it doesn't have an accent, it means somewhere, okay? And when we have the ha in front of it, it means wherever, okay? Not wherever the expletive, but wherever I went wherever you did, okay, that wherever. That introduces a relative clause or an indirect interrogative. I asked where in the world, wherever did you go, okay? And the same is true of post. Those are two examples. There are 3 or 4 more on page 526. Post, question mark, how, post without an accent somehow, hopos, however, not the adverb however, but I asked however he came, okay, that however. All right, so we're done.